My name is Robert Asselin. I'm Senior Vice President of the Business Council of Canada. It's my distinct honor and privilege to moderate this great panel. We're a bit ambitious with this panel. We have 5 amazing panelists, 3 with us today in person and 2 online that will join us through this amazing technology that we've had to live with during COVID. Let me introduce our panelists first before we get started. So I'll start with the folks who have been kind enough to come here in person and were able to. So to my right, Lisa Raitt, who doesn't need much of an introduction, former Minister of many portfolios in the Government of Canada, now Vice Chair of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. Thank you for being here, Lisa. We have Aaron Engine, Vice Chair and Co-Head Energy Transition with Group BMO. And we have right here with me Mike Renchek, CEO of Bruce Power, obviously well known in the energy sector. And with us, we have also Murad Al-Khatib, CEO of AGT Food. And we have Michael Temblin, CEO of Rakuten Kobo. Welcome and thank you for joining us. So maybe Lisa, I'll start with you on the first question. This is, as I said, an ambitious panel because the title is What Enterprise Can Do for a Better World. And God knows we have big problems in front of us, or challenges, I should say, or opportunities for the most optimistic of us. We have a big change in the labor force coming out of pandemic. We know this is profound, the great resignation, as some people have said. There's some renewed urgencies around climate change with COP26, and we'll dig a bit more on the climate change, energy transition front a bit more later. We have obviously the pandemic that is still not over, an aging population. So a lot of public policy challenges that require kind of a public-private partnership from the private sector. So the first question maybe I would ask to each of you, starting with Lisa, is what role do you see for the private sector in leading in these kind of structural issues? And specifically, if you are able to also speak about your own firm and kind of corporate approach to it.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you, Robert. And it's great to be on a panel with all these. It's great to see Murad again. The last time I saw Murad, he was on an important group that was studying the Canadian Transportation Act and did a fantastic job across the country helping us on public policy. I don't know where he found the time to build such a great company and do that as well, but I'm grateful for his public service that he gave us back in those days. But I would say the message, Robert, is pretty simple. It's not business as usual. And that what enterprises have to understand is just providing a job isn't enough. That's not how you're going to retain the young workforce. That's not how you're going to attract them. That's not how you're going to innovate. You really have to provide an all-encompassing narrative of your company as to how and why you matter in order to attract people and keep them interested in what they do. People are driven by purpose, and people are driven very much not just by having a job to go to collect money at the end of the day. They want it to be meaningful, and they want to feel that they're making a difference. And I know this from experience because I have a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old. And this is the kind of stuff that we talk about in our house, what they're searching for in life. But that applies as well to the folks that went through the pandemic by working from home, had that aha moment of, is this really what I want to do with my life? Is this really something that I want to go back to? And as a result, smart companies are going to not just adapt to working conditions, but really amp it up in terms of why are you with us, what are we here for, and how are we making this world better?
The sense of purpose. Maybe I'll go to you, Michael, online. What's your sense of your company's contribution to these big changes? How do you approach it?
It's interesting because I think the most meaningful thing that we have done is to stop treating issues like corporate responsibility or diversity or equity and inclusion as something that was done by a separate team or department, and instead integrating it into the daily operations of the company. And the way I kind of describe it is a company using its biggest muscles to help make change happen? Each company has a thing that they're good at, that they're optimized for. Kobo is in the business of selling ebooks and e-readers. So we're not really well optimized for planting trees or delivering food aid or rescuing animals. It doesn't mean we can't do those things, but it means that if we do them, we're only using a small percentage of the capability we have as a company. And so rather than having a department that is responsible for these things and setting them off to the side, we've tried to bake those change-making activities into each department's plan, into each operating plan, into each strategy, so that then when employees are looking at, is my company making a difference? They're not looking at a report from that team over there. They're looking at their day-to-day activities. They can see themselves moving change forward as a part of their regular work. It keeps it from being pigeonholed into a particular department that's kind of responsible for that stuff, and gives people the opportunity to make work more meaningful. And as we're going through that process of, as I think it's also been called, the great reevaluation, that sense of, am I doing good work, coupled with, do I have meaning in that work, are the two questions that people are answering.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe to you, Mike, now.
Yeah, this is kind of our DNA, the intro that you made. In 2019, we changed the vision of our company, its mission statement. Our vision is to power the future, and our mission is to safely produce clean, reliable, affordable energy, life-saving medical isotopes to strengthen our communities, protect the environment, and secure tomorrow. And then we went into a pandemic in 2020. But that mission statement really drives our people forward. During the pandemic, we reached out, we supported hospital systems, we supported vaccination clinics, actually setting them up and operating them for communities. We reached out to small businesses, and when PPE couldn't be had, we had a hotline where the hospitals could call us and we would deliver PPE to them, as well as local small businesses. We started an economic development program some years ago. We've had 63 companies move into rural Ontario. And I'm talking about a location where the largest small town or largest big town is about 14,000 people, right? So it's not a very robust area when it comes to economics. But we've had 63 companies move into the area now. In that area, we've had hundreds of thousands of square feet of abandoned factories that were decimated in the 2008 recession. Vacant storefronts now populated. We've created over 300 small businesses in the area, indigenous businesses, and we've continued on that path throughout the pandemic, and we've been able to keep working. And I think more importantly, we reached out to all the kids in the area. We created the Nuclear Innovation Institute, where we started to teach artificial language programming to grades 3 through 8 in the school system when the pandemic hit, and then we eventually moved into science. So we're in 65 schools now teaching teachers programming. We have 5,000 kids enrolled, one as far away as Ghana, Africa. And quite frankly, I think it's in the DNA of our people. And I liken it this way. For 500 positions over the last few years, we've had 29,000 applicants. And I think, people want to make a difference. They want to do something where they know it's going to make the world better. We're going to have clean air. We're going to have CO2-free emissions, change the world in terms of climate change, but also taking care of people, reaching out through medical isotopes, curing cancer, sterilizing equipment, and really making the world a better place. And it seems to resonate really well with our workforce.
Great story. Murad, you're also doing mission-driven stuff. Talk to us about how this period has changed your mindset going forward.
Well, I think that it's fairly apparent that in the time of a pandemic and in a time of a lot of global uncertainty, people start to pay attention to things that are really important, like food security and availability of food. And, we saw around the world, queues and lines ups and availability of food and food inflation is of paramount concern to foreign governments. And one of the things in our company that, we really had to sort through over our last, 20 years, kind of building from a, basement of my home startup to the size we are today, is that, profit and purpose are not at odds. And I think that, as business people, sometimes we get confused between activities that are for, philanthropy and for social good only, and those that we do, that still have very major social purpose, but that we're pursuing as a part of our business, and that there's a profit motive in addition. I'm a strong believer that, the world's, major problems, whether they be, clean, sustainable energy, drinking water, availability of food, and those types of issues, and even again, sustainability and climate change are going to be solved by entrepreneurs. It's going to be solved in partnership with governments and with NGOs. But ultimately, the private sector has a major role to play. And so once we as entrepreneurs start to recognize that we can do good and make profit at the same time, and that's a motivation that aligns our shareholders, our employees, and provides that glue that makes social purpose a key part of our strategy, that's when ultimately we're going to continue to succeed. And I'm a strong believer that the world needs a little bit more Canada and a little bit more of our approach to business. The fact that we are able to understand social purpose, it's integrated in our strategies, yet we can make profit at the same time. I think that approach is something that's very constructive, and one that actually has Canada in a unique position in the next decade as we go forward in the post-pandemic new economy.
Thank you. Aaron?
So I really appreciate a lot of the comments that have been made here already. And one of the things we've been seeing over the years, and Michael have known each other for a while, there's some fabulous stories with organizations around North America and around the world that recognize that they have a place in the world beyond just making returns for shareholders, and believe that they have a role to play in the community that has nothing to do with profit and loss and everything to do with making a positive impact in the community. I have meetings with clients in the U.S. just recently, able to finally travel a little bit again, and having these fabulous conversations with CEOs and with other leadership teams that are very focused on what's happening in the community right around them. The kinds of things that Michael's been talking about with Bruce Power, where there's community outreach, education programs, companies very focused on diversity and inclusion, very focused on climate change, the things that matter to the community. And one of the things that you see and that I see with the financial institutions, very focused on that as well. To be fair, the financial institutions are a reflection of the community that we serve. And when you think of banks in particular, we have a presence all across Canada, all across North America. We reflect the interests and desires of retail and commercial and wholesale clients. So we are very involved in how do you fund, if I'm going to focus for a moment on energy transition, which is a big part of the dialogue these days, very focused on how do we finance that? How do we get involved with our clients to support them in their endeavors to drive towards net zero on emissions? How do we help them grow their business? And at the same time being very reflective of our role in the community. And again, diversity, inclusion, climate change, energy transition, and all the other myriad social issues. I think there's a big role.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a fundamental role for financial institutions and all organizations to drive positive social change in the community.
That's a great segue to climate change. We've just seen COP26 is still ongoing. I think for a lot of people, there's a sense that not only we are dealing with something very urgent, but we're almost at the point where it may be too late. And so I want to talk a bit about energy transition and the role of firms and your companies specifically. Like, what's your sense on how does that playing out? Maybe I'll start with you, Mike. Going forward, obviously innovation will be key to solving this problem. How do you see the private sector as being part of the solution here?
Yeah, we need to lead by example. So at Bruce Power, we generate 6,550 megawatts of clean electricity for Ontario. Ontario's electric sector is already deeply decarbonized. So if you think about that, deep decarbonization is believed to be below 50 grams equivalent of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Here in Ontario, we're at 35. So anywhere on our electric grid, you can plug in, and we are deeply decarbonized. Contrast that with California at 135 grams and Germany at 400 to 500 grams. So we look at our role on that as we know to now electrify transportation and other sectors, we're going to have to make more electricity. So our innovation is really around continuing to upgrade our plants. We're likely going to be putting out by 2030 over 7,000 megawatts of clean energy. But it doesn't stop there. We've recently set up Bruce Power Net Zero Company to unlock complementary technologies to our technology and also look at how we can tie in different industries like the agricultural industry. So we're working with some of the local greenhouses on how to do carbon offsets. And while we're funding the initial products or projects, we're looking at a CO2 credit as a product to be able to use that so that we can lead by example and become net zero by 2027. So we're going to be carbon-free emissions by 2027 either through offsets or by making more energy. And I think that's that leading by example where the private sector can take that forward step and really show that it can be done in a positive way.
Murad, you're in a sector that is very central to this, ag food. Tell us about what you're doing on the sustainability side.
Well, I think that, ultimately there's what I would call a generational opportunity in agriculture in our country. And, when we look at the global landscape and we see the scarcity of two major natural resources, that is fresh water and arable land, Canada is abundantly blessed with a surplus of both. So that gives us the opportunity not only to look at, transformation of the products that we're producing, but really the uses. So when I look at the Western Canadian landscape in particular where we're active in a 3-crop rotation of cereal grains, pulses, which naturally fix nitrogen, and canola. And when we look at that, 3-crop rotation, each one has a very integral role to play in both climate change and in sustainability. So as we look at kind of the transformation of cropping and digital agriculture and the ability to track gains in, both yield and application of fertilizers, ultimately we have an opportunity to measure the carbon intensity of our agriculture, link it into plant-based foods, which we think are a key part of, the continued ability not only to meet the targets to feed 9.7 billion people by 2050, but to do it in a way that will be able to be consistent with climate change action items and targets. But we also have to look at, a transformation that we think is upon us, it's imminent. And that is looking at the canola fields of Western Canada to be synonymous with the Saudi Arabian oil fields that renew annually. And the ability to take canola grown by farmers in Western Canada and produce sustainable aviation fuel, sustainable diesel that can be used 100% in the new age of the transportation industry's decarbonization and the decarbonization of the economy is a very exciting generational opportunity for our country. So we look at those, kind of two things as really ones that are an opportunity upon Canada. If we seize that opportunity, not only will we enjoy economic prosperity, but we're ultimately going to contribute to climate change action targets in the world, and we're ultimately going to show our leadership, and that's, again, a little bit more of Canada that the world needs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Aaron, you're on the financing side of this. Tell us more.
So I have a real passion for this topic, and one of the reasons I'm doing leading our co-head for our energy transition group. We're in a unique time for many different reasons. But I was in a conversation with some folks a couple of weeks ago, and they said something that really stuck with me. This revolution that we're going through right now is very different from the 3 previous ones. You think of the three previous big revolutions: the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, and the information technology revolution. All of those were driven by fundamental changes in technology. This revolution we're going through in energy transition and trying to drive the economy to net zero is not today driven by technology. This is public policy. This is the will of the people to make these changes. And as Michael's talking about on Bruce Power, looking for new ways, new technologies, ways to do things better. And we're living that out and I fully expect that humanity, we will find ways to develop those technologies. The energy transition affects both the way we produce, so I appreciate the comments here on agriculture and sustainable aviation fuels. We're going to be changing the way we both produce and consume energy. We often forget about the consumption piece. That's a critical part of the energy transition. So when I think of the roles that organization, in particular, financial institutions can play, you got to be there to fund those activities. And institutions have to be willing to take not crazy risk, but you got to be willing to take more risk than we might have done 5 or 10 years ago to help incent those changes. You got to be able to be there to provide capital. And we hear from equity investors, they are there. We hear from debt investors, they are there. Show up with a green bond offering, and the world wants to be there. And finally, for the first time since really its inception, bondholders, banks are willing to take lower returns in order to be able to fund that transition. I think that's critical to how we move forward.
Lisa, you've joined the bank recently. What's your sense on the sense of purpose of Canadian banks to really move more aggressively into this sector and the investment?
So when I was in government and I was a cabinet minister, I was very used to seeing Murad. I was very used to seeing all kinds of people come in to tell me from their sector what was necessary for the government to do, what public policy lever needed to be changed in order for their company, their sector, their industry to do really well and be world-beating. And it was really a conversation just between the government and that sector or that company. What I find fascinating about banking and finance getting involved, and it's much to Aaron's point, is banking becomes a clearinghouse in a sense, because it's companies like AGT coming to the bank and saying, okay, this is what we want to do. And instead of the bank saying, too much risk and we're waiting for something to happen in the government, the banks are at least taking the meetings. And what they're doing, which I commend so strongly, is their individual bankers are really digging in and going very deep on understanding the issues, understanding the numbers of how many megatons you need to reduce and how we can get there and what are the multiple pathways. I mean, I never thought I'd go to a bank and have deep public policy discussions about what is needed and how we move forward. And I'm delighted. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I don't have to go door knocking to ask people to elect me in order to do that job. So it's a double bonus for me, quite frankly. But I'm so pleased to see them in that space and taking a real concerted effort, and good for BMO and good for CIBC to putting their shoulders behind the wheel.
Michael, maybe I can turn to you, less on energy transition because it's not your day-to-day kind of thing, but what about ESG and the role that companies increasingly play in that field? How do you see Canada leading in ESG? How do you see your own company kind of place into this new, very important thing for the public, for consumers?
Well, it's interesting because I think in so many ways this has become a topic that's being approached from two directions. It's become an issue of shareholder communication. There are certainly, if you're a publicly traded company, you're trying to make sure that you have a strong ESG narrative. Mm-hmm. But I've always said that if you ever want to see how a company's doing in ESG, ask the employees, because they're the ones that will tell you almost unequivocally how they believe that company's doing and how they feel that their actions are adding up to a sustainable outcome. And it's interesting because even if we come back to the question that we were talking about earlier around carbon transition, we're kind of a company that's based on the idea that at some point in the next 25 years, we won't be cutting down trees and pressing ink into them and driving them around so that we could read things. But that's turned into a whole examination of the carbon that we use in servers and the sustainability of our ability to develop hardware and reforestation projects that we're doing in Africa and in Canada in collaboration with Indigenous people. And all of it is driven by our employees. And their expectation is that we'll move quickly in that direction. And, in so many ways, this is the defining story of this generation. This is the equivalent of, what did you do in the war, Mom? What did you do in the war, Dad? They want to be able to look at their grandchildren and say, I was here, I did this work, and it turned into this positive benefit. And I was at a company that was able to show tangible results and that, and that made the world better. And I love that as the engine that's driving so many ESG initiatives, as opposed to, okay, how do we figure out how to check the boxes so that we can make sure that, that the funds pick us up? Mm-hmm. And I think it both creates more creative outcomes and frankly has more momentum inside the organization to get things done. Amazing.
Murad?
Well, I love the fact that, all the things that, as I look at my entrepreneurial journey over the last, couple of decades, things like health and safety of our employees, things like the environment, things like community development and initiatives are not only, essential elements of our strategy, but, ultimately, it's a capital access issue, one, but it's also one that creates tremendous shareholder value when we look at, both the value of our company, the access to capital and the image that we have with the ultimate consumer. I mean, consumers of today, I've got 20-year-old twins. They are ultimately the consumer of today, which ultimately was a consumer I looked to a decade ago and what they would require. And, that instant information that they've grown up with, they now demand accountability of companies in all sectors. Mm-hmm. In the food sector, they're demanding accountability for the ingredients in their food labels. They want to know the sustainability. They want to know the water use. They're not environmentalists. They're socially conscious, highly intelligent young adults. Mm-hmm. And that is the ultimate consumer imperative that is ultimately going to drive value. And that's what I love about, the pursuit of ESG excellence now, is that not only is it the right thing to do, but there's an economic reward at the same time. So, you can hear by my comments that I'm one that loves to pursue social, but loves the fact that it's so aligned with the profit goals at the same time. This is the beauty of the new economy that we're going into, is that those dinosaurs that are unable to react will ultimately die. Mm. And those of us that react are going to flourish. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the imperative on ESG. And again, I look at the Canadian culture. I keep talking about a little more of Canada. We just have this good, strong balance between, profit-making, innovative entrepreneurs and an understanding that we have to take care of each other.
Right. Michael?
When we look at these things, it gets back to being part of the DNA of the company. We make medical isotopes, as an example. Now, we run nuclear power plants, but we make medical isotopes. And at some point, somebody goes, why do you make medical isotopes? And you look at the person and go, simply because we can. And if we don't do it, who else is going to? In 2020 alone, we did 2 low-specific activity cobalt-60 harvests that sterilized about 24 billion pairs of surgical gloves and swabs during the pandemic. And with that isotope, we could sterilize in one day what takes other techniques 3 to 7 days to accomplish. So in the past few years, we've moved into brain tumor treatments. We power something called the Gamma Knife. Mm-hmm. It's a non-intrusive treatment for brain tumors. We brought technologies into Canada that treat breast cancer called Gamma Pods. So we looked at that and went, wow, we're helping people with this. We need to make more isotopes. So we've innovated. We've created a new production system that's going to go in place on our nuclear reactors where we'll be able to make isotopes in real time all the time. Our first isotope up is lutetium-177, which is a prostate cancer treatment. It's effective at stage 3 or 4 prostate cancer. Typically, if you catch prostate cancer in stage 1 or 2, it's treatable. 3 and 4, not so much. This will change that game. It's also taking a path around Dr. Amy Wong here at the University Health Network in Toronto. It's exploring a new method of cancer treatment called theranostics, where it's a diagnostic and a treatment at the same time, and it's amazing results. So now that we're lutetium-177, the question is, what's next? How can we help the medical community expand treatments? We can make isotopes at a scale that's not readily thought of simply because of the scale that we have. We can make cancer treatments that are affordable to society and in quantities where research can be afforded to be invested such that it can prove out. So when I look at ESG, it's not something that you do because you have to. It's something that you do because you can. Right. And it really is part of your DNA and where you're going to be able to help society. And at the same time, we're profitable. We're able to move that forward.
Right.
Robert, can I jump
yes,
on? I just want to give the origin story to your business right now, medical isotopes, which is this. In the past, it was mainly government-run reactors that produced medical isotopes in the world. It was South Africa, it was Canada, it was Belgium. Those were the only places that really did produce medical isotopes. Canada decided in the 90s that it wanted to corner the market and become the world provider of medical isotopes, developed this wonderful technology on paper called Maples, which in the end didn't work, unfortunately. It had a glitch that they were not able to fix all the great engineering work that we were able to do. That being said, when the Chalk River facility developed a crack because it was an old reactor, I found myself on the phone as the minister calling other countries, begging them to ask them to put their production up on medical isotopes because the world was missing medical isotopes. In steps the private sector. And thank goodness, because what you're doing at Bruce is such an important piece that gives, and it's not a whim of governments at that point in time. It is now part of your business model, and you are partnering with institutions that the government could never have partnered with, because we spread all of our love across the geography of Canada as opposed to making individual partnerships along the way. So to the original point, what's the role of private business? There you have it in a nutshell. That is the best example of the importance of private enterprise in doing things that are good for the world and good for the country.
And I would add that our partner is an Indigenous community in the investment to make the isotopes. So we're also helping communities evolve and grow.
That's awesome. That's a very powerful story. Aaron, maybe to you, again, on the finance side, I think, it's fair to say that there's some criticism on ESG standards and what qualifies, and a lot of financing being attributed to ESG that is, might not be as good as a standard as you might have. What is your sense on how is that evolving, and how do we get to a good place?
Well, yeah, I have, and yes, there has been criticism, but I think in fairness as well to all the financial institutions, there's only so much you can do, and all of this, the energy transition, ESG initiatives are incremental. You've got to start somewhere, and our role, as much as I'd love to be involved in producing isotopes, or I love those kinds of things, the nuclear facilities, as much as we'd love to do those kinds of things, our only role is providing capital.
Yep.
And if we want to make a difference, you have to start small. It's small steps, and eventually once you've hit those targets, your key performance indicators, you move the goal again. I'm mindful it took us many, many years to get to where we're at today. We're not going to change any of what we're working on overnight, but now I think the dialogue is at a point where all stakeholders, financial institutions, our clients broadly speaking, are very supportive of ESG initiatives broadly speaking. And whether it's diversity inclusion, whether it's a focus on the environment, whether it's just good governance, I think we have to start somewhere, and that's where we're going. So maybe it's a few basis points savings on lending today. Maybe it's a few basis points on bonds. Maybe it's helping clients and advising them on how to achieve ESG goals, which is something that we do.
Yeah.
And then over time, look, we'll get to where we need to be, but just be patient, but move the ball at the same time. And I think that's where we're headed.
Right. We have time maybe for our last round. I'd like to talk about the Great Resignation. That's the topic of the hour, it seems, that where the leverage now is more on the employee's side. And that must change the way you think about your own businesses. Maybe start with you, Michael. How do you see that playing out going forward?
When I look at what the pandemic taught us, I think the biggest lesson that we received was that we can trust employees in ways that we simply hadn't believed before. And let's be clear, most of us were forced to do it. Employers used to look with suspicion at anyone who has to work from home, and most companies, most of the time, simply didn't allow it. And then we were forced to do it, and our employees did the exact opposite of the sum of our fears. They worked hard, they got their jobs done, they brought their work into their homes. If employees had acted the way we assumed that they would act working remotely, entire businesses would have collapsed. And instead, it didn't happen. Over the course of a couple of months, we had the single biggest transformation in what working life looked like since the beginning of office work. And with almost no planning, no committee meetings, no year-long sort of strategic plans about how we're going to do this, it mostly worked. And yes, it's helped us to realize what the office is good for and where person-to-person interaction it can help us or add value, but it shouldn't take away from this great central fact, and it really shouldn't be a surprise, that people are mostly responsible and mostly take pride in their work and mostly want to do a good job. But they would also like some more flexibility, and they would like some more options in terms of how to integrate work in their lives differently. And so I know there are a lot of companies right now that have a lot of muscle memory sort of screaming, how quickly can I get people back into the office? But we have to separate our own organizational reflexes, or the money that we're spending on leases on office space, and acknowledge in some ways that our employees have earned it. They have proven their ability to work in different ways, and so that's the new reality we have to face. And so the two lessons we take from that is that the commitment of our employees is real, and the second is that massive change is possible. And if we're willing to acknowledge those, I think that's a big part of what keeps people with us. If the whole goal is to try to get back to the way things were as quickly as possible, you're going to have people who feel like, listen, I did my part in this great upheaval. I'd like to see something back from you, please.
Right. Just as a follow-up to that, I'm curious, a lot of tech companies were very fast in saying, we don't need employees anymore in our offices. You're free to work remotely until the end of the world. Do you think that was a mistake? Do you think that was a good thing? Do you think people will have some regrets on that?
Oh, I think anyone who's 6 months into the pandemic felt like they had a clear eye to what the future of work was going to be was operating from a very limited set of information. What we've tried to do is kind of each 6 months or so look at what's working and what isn't. Where is culture sustaining and where is it not? Where are people feeling like they still have connection to the company and where don't they? And certainly in a low unemployment, high demand market, you're not just looking at the ease of recruiting people. Having them feel like they have a strong connection to a place, that they have emotional attachment to a company, is the thing that's going to help them turn down that next job offer. So, and the more atomized and the more separated the people are, the harder it is to build that kind of connection. So we're really looking at how do we make sure we can give people the flexibility that they want, the ability to integrate their work and life well, but at the same time maintain those emotional ties that are at least half of the reason that people tend to stay with the company.
Murad, has the pandemic changed your views a lot on the relationship with your employees?
I mean, we're in a bit of a different industry in that, again, a lot of what we're doing is physical, goods manufacturing. And so, as a result of that, the great majority, I would say 95% of our workforce didn't get the opportunity to stay home for one day during the pandemic. So, we still had to continue to produce, what the world was deeming to be essential commodities. That was lentils and peas and chickpeas and beans and durum wheat. And so from that perspective, what we've, I think, been able to do, though, is build a lot of acknowledgement and loyalty from our staff on how many measures we took to ensure their safety and to continue to work on that. So that was the tough part. The tough part for us, frankly, is the knowledge-based and the service industries that have all their employees with all of this, quote, flexibility, that really is difficult to achieve when you're dealing in a physical goods way. So we've had to come up with, again, as Michael has had to do, we have to come up with different ways in which to provide that flexibility. We have to, ensure that our employees are valued. We've enhanced our benefits programs. We've given them more flexibility on choosing benefits. All of those things really are just more towards, integrating in that safety and health element, into everything that we're doing with our employees. And we've had, great retention. Agriculture was well set up. I mean, we're already used to hygiene, right? That was something that we deal with on a daily basis. But from that perspective, the pandemic response was one that we could easily go into. Frankly, governments caused us the most challenge because of their lack of, clear direction, and even the way they treated their own employees. They're saying one thing, in a public policy side and public health, and yet they had all of their employees at home much longer than what they were encouraging the private sector. All of those things caused us a lot more issue.
Right. Mike, when you think about talent and recruitment and do you think this will become a problem? I've heard CEOs, Linda Hasenfrat, very vocally saying, look, this is a problem to my productivity. I need people here working with me and, building things. Is that becoming almost like a hybrid world where in some sectors can work home and others have to actually do the work, physically?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have fantastic people at Bruce Power. We think they're the best in the industry. They didn't have a choice to stay home, many of them. We supply 30% of the electricity for Ontario and about 80% of the world's cobalt-60 for sterilization. So if we stopped doing that, it would have been a really difficult time. On any given day, in the midst of the pandemic, we had anywhere from 3,500 to 4,500 people reporting to work each day at peak shift on daylight. And then in a given week, we had anywhere from 10,000 to 12,000 unique individuals. I think what we learned out of this, though, is how much we depend on each other. And when we collaborate and we work together to solve problems, we're able to do that well. So we were able to put protocols in place that protected each other at work, and we did that very effectively. We had no workplace incidents. We were able to take that to our supply chain and teach our supply chain how to do that, so they were able to keep working. Let's face it, in the midst of the pandemic, a job was hard to find. And then once we had that in, we reached out into our communities, and we made sure that our communities would function. We supported food banks. We supported small businesses. We set up vaccination centers with public health because we knew how to do logistics. And we set up mass vaccination centers throughout Ontario, and where people in the thousands could be vaccinated in a day. So I think as we look at that, people with a purpose, people with a mission, people with a sense of not only company pride, but community pride, we have a very good draw on talent. And as I said earlier, we've had about 500 open positions in the last few years. We've had upwards of 29,000 applicants for those positions. Wow. And I think that's the nerve we have to strike as companies, that people really come to work. We're family, right? We come to work and we go home, and we need to take care of each other.
Lisa, Aaron, you look at banks, they're not been the first to call back employees. Like CEOs again saying, I'm in competition to get the best software engineers with tech companies. How does that change this relationship between employers and employee?
So when I think of the this work from home or hybrid work environments, frankly, and we've touched on it a little bit here already, it's just the tip of the iceberg of the kinds of things that organizations need to do now to attract, retain, and motivate good employees, to have people that want to work hard and stay with the organization. Pay isn't the only thing anymore. And frankly, many organizations, including BMO, are using the potential for hybrid work environments, different ways to motivate and send people, using different hiring mechanisms, different kinds of people, different ways that the organization and employees interact with each other to turn it into a much richer and more enjoyable place to work, and are using those things as competitive advantages. Without that, you look across the street and you will lose good people because somebody across the street's doing that.
Last words to you, Lisa.
Well, you may not like my last words. I'm going to tell you that this is a real problem. It is hard enough to be a woman in the business community, let alone be given this Hobson's choice where either you're going to do caregiving at home for your kids or you're going to go into work. And what I'm very fearful of happening is the fact that we get the option and a lot of us make the choice. I would really like to be home when the kids come home after school. I know I can work. It's not going to be a problem. But the real decisions are made after that Zoom call goes off. And it's the guys sitting in the boardroom table because they have the luxury of being able to sit there, whereas women have other obligations. And, you know, I've got my feminist hat on this one, not my CIBC hat, so I'm not speaking for the bank on this whatsoever. But I want to see the data. I want to see exactly what's going on with this whole notion of hybrid. Who's it working for? You know, the average caregiver in the United States is a 49-year-old woman who spends 24 hours a week looking after her mother who has Alzheimer's. And if I had the option to stay at home and work from home and make that load a little bit lighter, I'm going to take it. But am I missing out on promotion? Am I missing out on training? Am I missing out on mentoring? Absolutely. So now we're going to legitimize this world where hybrid is okay, and yet not put in those suspenders we need in order to ensure that we don't fall behind as having gender equity. So, end of rant.
Very powerful message to end this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me and give me a round of applause to this amazing panel.